Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of these little guys right here. This is two different examples of the Bestech Tonic pocket knife. First off, though, before I go any further, I got to let you know that these were both actually sent to me directly by the designer, Colin Masonpierre. He is the person right on there, CM Designs, that is him, and he sent these guys along to me because, well, he thought I'd be interested in it, and indeed I am. But first off, though, I told him, I sent him my disclaimer, I told him I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly. It might be a gem, it might be junk. He did still send it along. Nonetheless, we have to assume these are the very best quality controlled one of these guys ever, and I'm doing my best not to let that affect the nature or the quality of my review, and I will be sending these review samples back to him afterwards. So there is that. One other note about that actually is that this guy in carbon fiber, the designer had carried a fair amount before he sent it to me, just because he wanted me to feel one that was broken in, as well as then this guy, which was straight from the factory, which I have broken in a fair amount myself. So there is that. But anyways, that's what we got going on there, full disclosure. Next thing, let's go on ahead and do some size comparison. I'll just use the carbon fiber one for this one. Here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2. And so there you go. We see here it is in terms of Rat 2 blade length, right about the same sort of vicinity. Here it is against the Spyderco PM2. At the moment, wearing a very fancy set of scales. And what we see here is this is substantially smaller than the PM2. And then finally, here it is against another backlock, which is the Spyderco Delica. And so what we see here is that, yeah, this is not a particularly huge knife right here. But what we do see also is that in terms of thickness, we are not that far off of the Delica, although it is a little bit thicker, and the pivot itself is a little bit thicker as well. So this is a relatively compact little backlock knife. And speaking of which, this is a backlock, but it is different. Right, if we take a look at this backlock right here, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to show you this. Let's zoom in a little bit here and see. Put a little light on the subject. What I hope you're going to be able to see in there is that at the bottom of the backlock, there we go. Right in that little tiny gap there is a little tiny ball, a ceramic ball riding along the lock bar, which is why you see that one little tiny line on the back of the blade right there, rather than being a more conventional backlock where it is a straight bar that rides along the back of the blade, like on your Delica here. So this is a very different approach to backlockitude, and we'll talk about that more later, and if you'd like to see more details there, of course, check out my disassembly video. So anyways, there you go. Next thing, who made this guy? Well, this is from Bestech Knives. This is a Bestech branded knife. Bestech is a company. They are based out of China, and they have made a bunch of knives for a bunch of different folks. So there is that. And then finally, just so you know ahead of time, the price on this guy ranges from $290 or so for this kind of variant here, all the way up to $306 for the carbon fiber. A couple of different approaches. So let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this very interesting little knife. So on the good side, start with this guy is a relatively compact knife. If we take out our little ruler here, what we see here comes in under 3 inches, pretty uncontroversially. That's going to be good legally speaking for a number of folks. And the knife itself is relatively compact too, although I will note that the blade to handle ratio isn't particularly great, but that's because it gives you a lot of, well, a lot of handle for the blade, which is actually a nice thing, speaking of which, in the ergonomic territory. Because this offers a fair amount of handle to blade, I have a full 4-finger grip on this, and I suspect that even folks with larger hands would as well. Having this finger choil here, having this amount of hand, just makes this a very easy knife to control in the hand. And ergonomically speaking, although you can feel the clip a little bit, it is by and large pretty well done ergonomically. And so as a result, I feel like this is pretty nice. And with that finger choil particularly, it cuts well, it works very well in the hand. Next thing, this has a couple of different materials. Right here we see a carbon fiber variant here with a little bit of a blue pivot collar. There is also a micarta version, and there are a couple of different colors of micarta. There's a black, a blue, etc. So you see these out there and available in a couple of different colors, which I think is a nice thing. Next thing, this guy has a clip on here, and I mean, that's good in and of itself, right? But the clip itself works well. It is a milled clip, so it's not just a little spring kind of clip on here, but this is a milled clip, but it has the right amount of elasticity to it. It sticks down there. This has been very easy to carry, right? I can throw this guy into the pocket, and it works absolutely great. It's keeping the knife in there. It is a relatively shallow carry with about yay much sticking up above your pockets there. Not the end of the world, but it is a nice little clip on here. It works great, and it is ambidextrously mountable. So you can swap this guy over. Which actually brings us to our next point, that this is a fully ambidextrous knife. This is a backlock knife, and the way that you work a backlock is once the blade is open, you press down on this part in the back here, then you close the knife, and that part is accessible from both sides, as are the thumb studs, as is the clip. So this means that a lefty and a righty have exactly the same experience with a pocket knife, which is not particularly common out there in the knife world. And so that is actually a very nice thing for about 10% of the population, and not a bad thing for everybody else. So that's good. Next thing, this is a backlock, and oftentimes, and depending on kind of how they're built, backlocks can be more or less straightforward to take apart and put back together. This guy is very easy to disassemble, which is a beautiful thing. It's something I very much appreciate. It is also, remarkably, for a backlock, very easy to deploy. Watch this. I've got my hand placed against the table here, and this pops open very reliably, and that's a well broken in one. Here's one that's a little less so. Still opens very, very well. Yeah, maybe there's a little tiny bit of wrist in there, but not really a meaningful amount, right? Yeah, that opens very, very reliably. And that is very unusual for a backlock. It is not at all common that you get backlocks that flip open like that, so we're going to talk a little bit about why in just a moment, but that is a really nice little thing. And so if you're looking for a very quick knife that is also a backlock, this is actually about the only game in town, although certainly if you loosen it up a little bit, like with a Delica, you can kind of almost get there, and if I loosened it up a little more, maybe. But either way, it's a quick backlock, and that's weird. Next thing, the finishing on this guy is actually good. If we take a look at the pivot collar here, we see a little bit of bronze there. Looks like a nice satin on there. The pivot on this guy is good. And frankly, there are some nice design touches, generally speaking, with the milled clip on here, with the shared lines that kind of go across the micarta and all the way through, which is nice. You've got the little cutout in the back here for the pocket clip, in addition to 2 screws, which means it's going to sit very kind of securely wherever you're at there. Pivot looks good. Overall, just, you know what, the knife is well done. It's got some and even the pivot itself, it's just cool, right? I think this is a very nice little knife, honestly. There's a lot of really good design work here. I'm sorry, well, good design work and, frankly, good production work, even with the swedge on the top of it there. So that's nice. And then finally, on the good side, to me, the blade on this guy is very, very nice. It is an M390 blade, which is a beautiful thing, right? That's one of the best knife steels out there these days. And so that's good to see, but it is ground very, very thin. This comes down to an exceptionally thin edge. I mean, there are thinner out there, but not commonly in production. So we come down to a very, very nice thin edge, which means this guy cuts like crazy. That is a beautiful thing. And then the shape of the blade is kind of, frankly, unusual, right? This is sort of a mix between a sheep's foot and a spear point, and I just don't know what it is. And then coupled with that little swedge on the top of it there, it's just kind of weird, but you know what? It works. It's very effective. It's good in the hand. It works quite well. And honestly, although the balance is a little bit further back, the way that this kind of goes with the ergonomics and with the blade shape here, it works very well. I'm a big fan of it. And coming down to that nice thin edge is just like, oh, yes. So even though the stock on this guy is maybe a little bit thicker than some out there in the world, it is coming down to a great edge on a great blade, and to me, that's very, very good. And all of that is the good. It has a nice blade, some nice design touches, good finishing. It is fully ambidextrous with easy deployment and disassemblability. It's got a nice clip, good ergonomics, a few different materials, and a compact size. The great side to me, the great thing about this knife to me 100% is the lock. This is something that is old, right? The backlock idea is very, very old, right? We see this on lots of knives from the histories past. You know, for instance, the Buck 110 is technically a tail lock, but whatever. It's the same basic idea. This lock has been around for a good long time. But one of the big problems with backlocks, insofar as people consider it a problem, is that they tend to deploy very slow, right? It's very hard to flick open a backlock. You can do it with some, but it's not super duper common, and very often to do it, you end up having blade play and things like that. This takes that idea and it modifies it. It puts, instead of the entire bar rolling around along the top of the thing, causing a lot of extra friction, it just uses one single ceramic ball. And that's really cool. And so you get the benefit of a backlock, namely that they are fully ambidextrous and very strong. Not that, lock strength is a meaningful factor in a lot of modern pocket knives. They're all just about as good. But it also rectifies that slow deployment, and it makes this a knife that feels like you're carrying any other modern knife, except that it happens to be a backlock. And so you get the flickiest backlock ever. And frankly, I love seeing this because I love seeing people revisiting designs from the past and ideas from the past and putting a present spin on it, right? That is an absolutely beautiful thing, and it's not something that's common at all right now. We are in a very boring age of knife making, and so seeing somebody do something entirely different with an old pattern is really neat. Maybe not entirely different, but you know what I'm after here. So to me, what is great is that they have taken an old idea, that is the backlock, and they've turned it into something new with a couple of more compelling advantages relative to what existed before. And so to me, that is great. On the bad side, only a couple of little things here. To start with, there is no clip plate on this side, meaning that these screws are kind of just in there. One could make the argument that that then recesses the screws, which is a nice thing, but at the same time, it feels a little bit sort of like a hole there. I am not, though, going to ding them because that makes the knife fully ambidextrous, right? Well, I just dinged them, I suppose, but I'm not going to be too much of a dick about it because this knife should be ambidextrous. The clip should be, and so having that there is just an acknowledgement that this is a fully ambi knife. I'm not so bent out of shape about it, but it definitely adds a little bit of hardware look to it. Now, it might be nice to see a plate there, but, you know, whatever. Not a big deal. In a perfect world, countersunk screws. That way there's nothing sticking up and you get a plate. But anyways, there you go. Next thing, this guy is a backlock, certainly. And the way that you generally would close a backlock one-handed, I'll show you with the Spyderco Delica here, is you put your finger right about here, and then you put your thumb right about there, and then you press down, and then you kind of shake it down a little bit, and then you can turn around, do that. And on a conventional backlock, that is pretty straightforward, and you can kind of get used to it. And, you know, at this point, I've carried the Delica enough that I'm pretty good at it. With this guy, you can kind of do the same thing, where you put it down there, but the problem is there were additional points of inflection. Right, there are additional areas where the ball is kind of rolling over something, and if you don't get the angle past, there's this little kind of, you can kind of hear and feel it right there. If you don't get that blade down past that by pressing really hard down into there, then there's one more thing you kind of have to press over. And so this, to me, ended up feeling a little bit more unpredictable for a one-handed close. Yeah, see, it just kind of hung up right here at first, and then I pressed harder and got it past there. That's not ideal, right? To me, that just feels like maybe there's not enough lift off here. So it's hanging up on that ball in a few situations. Don't get me wrong, you can close this guy one-handed, but it's just a lot more unpredictable than a conventional style backlock. And I think that's something that they probably can adjust. And see, if you put your fingers too far down, then you end up with the heel of the blade touching your finger there. And that's not a great thing. So I think they just need to adjust a little bit the geometry of the lock here to make sure that it doesn't hang up on that little ball at that little corner there, and so that it's a little bit smoother to shut all the way. So that is a bad thing. And then finally, on the bad side, the price here is a bit high, right? We're looking at M390, we're looking at titanium, we're looking at a decent micarta here, but it's $300, right? Anywhere from $290 to $306, right? That's a pretty high-end price, right? And this is a knife that I think it feels a little bit more towards the middle of the road in terms of innovation. Leader of the pack. Sure, well, maybe not leader, but it's pretty damn good. But in terms of just like carrying a pocket knife or something like that, I don't know that this fully earns its price tag, right? This kind of feels to me, when I was doing because I carried this guy for a while without knowing the price, and I had this guy around $225, maybe $200 in my head, knowing Bestech, and you know, that they generally have excelled by keeping prices low. And I kind of get the feeling that Bestech, along with a number of the other Chinese factories, have kind of lost the message that where they're most excellent is at delivering high quality for lower prices. This is high quality, 100%, but it's not a lower price. And so I just feel like 50 or 75 bucks snuck into the price here, and that to me is bad, right? I'd like to see this coming in a little bit cheaper to make it more competitive with some of the other options that are out there in, well, frankly, anywhere in the pocket knife world. And so as a result, this has a premium price, which means you really have to want the full ambidextrousness or the modern approach to backlock. It makes it more of a collector's knife than something I would just recommend. Yeah, like, go buy one of these. It's great. So to me, that's what's bad, is that the price is a bit high. One hand close is a little trickier with this design, although I think that could be fixed, and there is no clip plate here. On the ugly front, I was a little bit debating about whether this little hang up here is ugly, but the thing is, that's going to be such an easy fix that I hope a future generation won't even have it. So we'll just go on ahead and go into the conclusion here, which is that this is an interesting new take on a very old idea, right? because it's got a compact size. Oh, that time I didn't get it. Interesting. But, see, it's not 100%, but it's very, very close. And as I'm actually carrying it, not manipulating it under a camera, it is very reliable. But anyways, interesting new take on an old design. With a compact size, with a choice of materials, good ergos, a nice clip, easy disassembly and deployment, except when I'm being an idiot on camera. It's got fully MB, just generally speaking, with clip and everything being ambidextrous. It's nicely finished. It's got some nice design touches, a nice blade, and it's a new take on an old approach. There is no clip plate for the gap over here on this side. The one-hand close is not necessarily straightforward, although it is workable, and the price is pretty up there. But honestly, this was refreshing to me. This was nice for my soul, right? Because right now, it feels like, and I'm filming this in, November of 2022. And it feels like we are in a kind of boring era for knife making, right? There are hundreds of new frame locks, liner locks, button locks, etc. It kind of feels like particularly some of the Chinese-made brands have just aimed a fire hose of boring knives and average knives at the community and just kind of let rip, right? And they're just spraying boring knives everywhere. And there's no shortage of self-publishing designers feeding that process, right? It's just kind of a thing. And so right now, for a little while, it's kind of felt like any given new knife feels like it is new only in the sense of recent. And everything else about it is something we've seen before. It's just, oh, well, this one has a line here. This one, they don't have a why. There's no reason why it's different, why it's interesting, why it's different. It's just, it's a thing. Like, hey, here's a new knife. You want it? And it's just like, no, generally not. But this is actually something new. This is the designer looking at something old and thinking, backlocks. Those are nice. I like those. How can I make it better? How can I do something different with it? And indeed, that's what just happened, right? Took a look at the past and learned from it and thought, I can make that better and do really well with it. And I think that's really great, right? Looking at the past to learn how to make the future better is not a bad idea when it works, right? And so I love that. And it is incredibly uncommon. I think that makers look at the current, market and go, what could be different that isn't? What could I do better? And I love seeing that here. It's amazing, it's uncommon, and it makes me very glad I checked this out, and that is exactly the reason I checked this out. This design, done as another liner lock, done as another frame lock, honestly, okay, I guess, should be fine, right? But instead, this is something much more interesting. The knife itself, to be clear, if you're looking at this as like, do I want to buy this pocket knife as my daily tool? It's a very solid knife, and it's doing all the things it needs to be a great daily carry piece, and frankly, it was a knife I enjoyed carrying. I carried it a fair amount, and on purpose, actually, just to make sure that it was going to wear in well, because this one was factory fresh. I didn't want to, it's easy to flick, when, day one, it wasn't as much, right? There is a wear-in process. But it's a really nice little piece. And more importantly, it's a different piece. It's a unique piece. It's something new. It's something innovative. It's something that's different in 2022, which is not a thing. And the only thing that is keeping this out of gem go buy one territory is that price tag, which I still do feel, even with that innovation, even with that difference, just ends up being a little high relative to the competition. Right? So that said, if you like the idea of this, if you're looking at this and going, yeah, I love backlocks, but I wish I could flick it, then oh boy, do I have something for you. And I imagine that there are future iterations of this design, of this lock, that are going to pair this interesting lock approach with other designs that might be even cooler, right? That might bring you some additional joy, and so that might be a thing too. But if you're just after a knife, I think you can get more for less, but this is still a pretty good option. But I want to take a step back and specifically applaud Colin and Bestech for doing something new here. We have entered, as I said, this most boring era of knife making, and it is so nice to see somebody just saying, yeah, that sounds cool, let's give it a shot. And so I really encourage them to keep giving it a shot, because that's what keeps the community fresh, that's what keeps new ideas flowing, and a constant flow of same doesn't advance the community, but this sure does. So at that level, I absolutely love the work, I absolutely love the thinking, and it's a really solid knife too. And there you go. So I hope this has been interesting to you, and that this has been a good tonic for your, this has been a good tonic for the community. Let's just put it that way. And hopefully it's very medicinal and starts to heal things soon. And have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.